Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Entertainment Network. I am your host, Sarah, and as always, I am delighted to be with you on another Tuesday for another author interview. Have a great episode for you today. As we get started, I would like to remind you, as I always do, to please like, follow, subscribe, etc. on whatever platform you are either listening to or watching this episode on. If you want to support the podcast in another way, you can do so by going to gsmcpodcast.info, and there you're able to leave a tip or a donation. That really does help to it helps not only this podcast, but the network as a whole. It is greatly appreciated. If you want to leave a question or a comment while you're there, I would be happy to engage with those the next episode after I receive them. Always happy to answer questions, engage with comments, etc. Love hearing from you. But like I said, if you want to support the podcast in a monetary fashion, you can do so by going to gsmcpodcast.info. As always, every amount of support you have given this podcast through the years has been greatly appreciated, and I, whether that's the royal we or the network we really appreciate it. I greatly appreciate all of the support that this podcast has received, and thank you so much for being part of this podcast's journey with me over the past years. So I hope that you are having a good week so far. Hope you had a good weekend. First weekend in October. So maybe you got out and did what my family calls a fun fall thing. I don't know why we started saying fun fall thing, but that's what we call when we, at my parents' house, when we go in the backyard and we build a fire and we roast hot dogs and marshmallows and have s'mores and just sit around. It's a fun fall thing, and I miss doing that. I haven't done that in forever with my family. They still, of course, do it. And actually, you know what? I just realized that they started doing it in the front yard in recent years because of the way the fire pit is. That has nothing to do with anything that you care about, but I just realized that it's no longer the backyard. The last time we did a fun fall thing, it was in the front yard. Random. Anyway, I hope that your weekend was good. Ours was okay. Still a bit hard, and this weekend involves my friend the migraine, which is really not a welcome friend, but insists on showing up and making its presence known at the least helpful times, of course, but got through it, and despite that, still managed to spend some time with our friends who are here from London over the weekend, so that was good. They are going back to London this coming weekend, so it was good to at least see them a little bit over the weekend, and we will see them again, I believe, tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow's Wednesday, so we're having lunch with them. And our friends from Germany also came over last night. We made pizza, and that was fun. They have two kids, 6 and 11, and then the 11-year-old had a friend with her, 13. So my husband made the pizza crust and had the toppings there, and the kids got to choose whatever toppings they wanted. It was really fun to see what they chose. The 11-year-old was the least adventurous. She just wanted cheese. Makes sense. The 6-year-old did half and half just cheese and then half with green peppers and onions. Thought that was an interesting choice. Not a lot of kids like green peppers and onions, so go 6-year-old. The 13-year-old was the most adventurous. I think the only thing she didn't want was mushrooms. She did, we had some sausage and green peppers, onions, mushrooms, black olives, I think were the choices. So good for her. And then the adults, we just piled everything on our pizza because I like everything on my pizza, and so did the rest of the adults. So that was fun. Anyway, had some good social time with friends who are here briefly and then leaving again over the weekend, and it will be once again quiet and less international in our lives. But we are here to talk about books. As I mentioned at the end of the last episode, I used the word duology. There are currently 2 books in this series, but more are coming. Russell will be talking about that. I'm speaking today with author Russell Little about his books Murder for Me and Murder by Storm. Murder for Me has been out. Murder by Storm is coming out soon. I think October 22nd. He does mention that in the interview, so pay attention to that date that it is coming out. Let me go ahead. I'm just going to give you the description of Murder for Me because, again, with series like this, you don't want to give too much away. So I'm just going to give you the description of Murder for Me. Ava is a middle-aged socialite jogging through a wooded park near her Houston home. The trees and her earbuds provide the only escape from her problems. Little does she know, another problem is waiting just ahead, the kind of problem that wants her dead. Houston attorney Larry Lamb has his own difficulties to sort through. He's mediocre at work and a failure at marriage, and there's something inside him screaming to get out. It's becoming harder and harder to control, and it's affecting him in mysterious ways. Ava's husband, Don, is madly in love with Marilyn Ramirez, a woman with the power to convince men to do whatever she wants. Marilyn has been arrested on suspicion of attempting to have Ava murdered so she can have Don for herself. When Don drops a six-figure retainer onto Larry's lap to defend Marilyn, Larry schemes to dump the case and keep the money. But Marilyn has a different plan, and the minute Larry sees her, her plan starts working. Can Larry resist Marilyn's manipulation, or will she summon the mysterious voice hidden deep within him? Follow Larry's journey into the mind in this dark psychological page turner. So that is the description of Murder for Me, and there's a lot going on there. There's plots there. Larry's. We talk a little bit about the issue that Larry has and how that plays out throughout the book. We talk about Marilyn as a character and how she wasn't supposed to be quite as big of a character as she actually turned out to be, which I think is amazing. And there's a lot of interesting things because you think on the surface it's just the story of Ava, who has several attempts on her life, and her husband's mistress seems to be behind them. But it is not that simple, and the book takes several twists and turns, and so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the second book, Murder by Storm, in which there is a hurricane, and that is a huge part of the plot of that book. But let's go ahead and have Russell tell you more about the writing of both of these books. Again, they are Murder for Me and Murder by Storm. The author is Russell Little. Hello, Russell, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you for being here. I'm excited to talk to you. You've got a duology that we're going to talk about, but before we get to the books, if you wouldn't mind sharing just a little bit about yourself, I would appreciate it.
Sure. My name is Russell Little. I spent the last 41 years practicing law and raising a family and being married to my one wife in Houston, Texas. In the last 2 years, I've lived in the cold mountains of Georgia, which is very beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I finished my first book when I was about 52. I've written most of my life, but I didn't finish a book till after the last son left for college and gave me a warning. That's a story I'll be glad to tell you. I graduated from law school from the University of Texas School of Law.
Mm-hmm. All right.
I finished my career representing mainly people in family law, divorces, and criminal law.
Okay. All right. So I talked to a lot of authors who were lawyers, whether for their entire career or part of their career. So you come from a long line of lawyer turned author. That's awesome. I mentioned earlier, I lived in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So Texas, but very different Texas.
It's a different Texas than Houston. They're very different places. If you're not from Texas, you don't know it. But once you hit the two cities, you know it almost instantly.
And I thought Dallas was hot, but it has nothing on Houston.
No.
And the humidity, no thank you. I don't blame you for moving out of that.
Well, I didn't mean to. All my adult children now live in Houston, so I miss them, and all my grandchildren. We go back every month, though, so I don't miss the heat. I'm there for the heat.
Then you get to go back and see everyone so that you get your fix, right?
Right.
Yes.
And I'm very sorry you have to talk to so many lawyers. That's usually a bad thing.
Most of the time it's okay. It's worked out pretty well. And they you usually write some good thrillers. It seems to be the way the mysteries and thrillers seem to be the direction.
You
Crime
meet a
fiction.
lot of characters when
Yeah,
you're a
I can
lawyer.
only imagine. So the first book is called Murder for Me, and then we have Murder by Storm.
Yes, this is Murder for Me.
Yep. There we go.
It was reissued by my new publisher in May. Uh, the I worked on this book for years until my youngest son went to college and said, "Dad, you're running out of time. You better get it finished."
So that was the threat. Okay.
That was the threat. And then Murder by Storm comes out on October 22nd. I'm very excited about it. I worked very hard. There was a complete different intellectual challenge when I wrote this book. So I was very excited about it. Murder by Storm actually is a murder thriller that occurs during a hurricane, which
Right.
is kind of suitable for Houston.
Yeah. Yeah. And they have similar characters, so that you can read them. You could probably read them separately or together, but they do carry through a story. So let's start with Murder for Me. It's not a full length novel, and it's not a novella, so it's a little bit in between in terms of the storyline. But can you give an overview of that story?
Well, it's funny how you mentioned that. You know, as modern books are going, they're going smaller. And so when I first wrote this was a little bit with that influence to tell the story that way. It's about a lawyer. It's a psychological thriller, especially the first one, because it's about a lawyer losing his ability to control his own personality. And as the book goes on, he loses more and more control. And that's just one subplot of the story. But I actually, during my career, came across this, and it was such a dramatic thing. I never could forget it.
Oh, I imagine.
And it demanded to be a part of the story. It wasn't something where you choose what your story is or you make it up. It was demanded to be a part of the stories, and I had to do it. And it was really difficult because you've got to write where the actual character is shifting back and forth, and that's a challenge.
Yes. I can imagine, because I mean, we see however you want to call it, split personalities, or a more medical term. I've heard different things, but however you want to call it, we see it portrayed in books and film. But to actually have encountered this in real life had to have been an incredibly challenging experience, and then to convey that on the paper. So talk a little bit about the challenges of writing Larry, the character of Larry, and then his Larry and Lar.
Wow, you've really read the book. Thank you.
I did read the books.
I'm so grateful. It was, I had to redo it over and over, because how do you communicate what Larry's thinking, and then as he starts to lose control and his more aggressive personality takes over, which is Lar, how do you communicate what he's thinking, and how do you make sure that the reader's not confused? Because you want the writing to go smoothly. You don't want the reader to have to pull back. Now, what is this? Who is this? You don't want that to happen. So it's a real challenge. And then when the same person goes back and forth between personalities, that makes it even a bigger challenge. And so I had to find some kind of symbol to repeat during the novel to show how Larry was deteriorating. And I frankly used sex to use it and the description of what he was doing as a symbolic explanation of what was happening to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never actually considered using, I always wondered, well, why do you just put sex into something? If not just for the appeal of sex? Because I really wasn't interested in that, because this was really an intellectual struggle to prove to myself that I could complete a novel and publish it. So I really wasn't interested in that. But it demanded to be a part of the story in how I explain how bad he had gotten, right?
Yeah. Sorry for the crazy glare on my face there at the end. It was a lovely sunset, but it was really, really bright, and I knew it at the time. But you don't want to just stand up in the middle of somebody talking to you, say, so you can go close the curtain. But maybe I should have. Anyway, sorry about that. I was also thinking that the way that Lars' character was written, Larry/Lars' character was written, and the way it continued to evolve was really interesting. And I hadn't really thought about the fact that, yes, Lar did use sex in a way that was much different from Larry's character, and that was a way of differentiating that Lars' character was taking, or Lars' part of their personality was taking over. And I thought that was a really interesting way to do it. Not really something that I had thought of before, but definitely one of the more, I mean, there's a lot of reasons to put sex in a book, right? And this, I think, was a logical reason, a reason that made a lot of sense, but maybe not one that I would have thought of. So we are going to go ahead and take our first break of this episode. When we come back, talking a little bit more about Larry/Lar, as well as some of the other characters in the book. You are tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to work, cause my boss is a jerk, and I'm not even that paid. I need a change in my life, cause I don't feel alive, and there's nothing that makes me happy. Hold my beer for a minute, I'm about to quit my job, cash in for a ticket. I'm going on a trip and I don't plan to visit. I'm gonna stay there till I feel like I'm winning, and this is just the beginning. I need a big change, help me feel like living. I need a big swing, home runs I'm hitting, and I'll never look back, moving on till I get it all. And we all got dreams, we all want things, but what you gonna do for it? How you gonna move for it? What you gonna be? And do you believe you can do anything?
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author Russell Little. Before the break, we were talking about Lars' character and Larry/Lars' character and how that character evolved. As we get back into segment 2, I want to remind you quickly one more time that if you want to support the podcast in a monetary fashion, you can do so by going to gsmcpodcast.info. Again, also you can leave a question or a comment, but if you go to gsmcpodcast.info, you can leave a tip or a donation. It is greatly appreciated. Helps not only this podcast, but the network as a whole. Getting back into segment 2, as I said, we were just talking about Larry/Lars' character and the evolution of those personalities. Let's go ahead and get back to the conversation with Russell. Does that, along with just kind of, they have very different personalities in terms of aggression. Larry is much more passive. Lar is much more aggressive, much more, get things done and that. So, as you said, that's only one layer. So Larry is a lawyer. He actually ends up kind of inadvertently representing someone that he doesn't mean.
Because he's so passive that it has to be inadvertent, right?
Yeah. So Marilyn is the person that he's representing. And then actually Marilyn and the detective who is investigating her case carry over into Murder by Storm. So the tricky thing is we don't want to give too much away about either book. So we can't talk too much about the first book and what happens, but Marilyn and OC do carry over. So can you give a brief overview of Murder by Storm?
Well, I'm almost afraid to do that, though. I appreciate what you're saying. And the reason why is because recently I've started getting a flood of questions about because at the end of Murder for Me, there's a shoot.
Yes.
There's shooting. And the readers have come to conclusion before they get to Murder by Storm about who lived and who died. And, you know, the funny thing about writing is you never know completely what readers will hook onto.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I tried jury trials for 40 years, and that was true with the jury. You would have a group of 12 people that you would present your case to, and the other side would present their case to, and you would fight as hard as you could for days, weeks, and you would be certain that the jury was deciding on A. You knew that there's no way they would think about B, and X never occurred to you. And then after the trial was over, there would always be 2 or 3 people that were on the jury that want to talk. Many of them, they don't want to talk. They don't want to be bothered. There's always 1 or 2 or 3 that want to talk. And I was always, as a young lawyer, I was always shocked at what they decided to make their decisions on.
Mm-hmm.
As an older lawyer, I wasn't shocked because I expected it to be something I didn't plan on.
Yeah.
Books are that way too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you never know what people are going to take away. And in a previous life, I did a lot of public speaking, and I never knew what people would come up to me afterwards and say, wow, X, Y, and Z really resonated with me. And I'd think, okay, that I didn't really think about that part at all. Or what I thought would really resonate with people, no one even noticed in what I was saying. So I can imagine it's the same with jury trial, and it's the same with writing.
It was with juries. I always used tests. I would tell jokes as part of my voir dire. Voir dire is how you question a jury panel to pick the 12 people that you want on the jury. Mm-hmm. And it got to where if they didn't laugh at my jokes, I wouldn't let them be on the jury because I knew that I didn't have any connection to them.
Interesting.
Can't do that with readers.
Yeah. Yeah. So like dad kind of jokes or
well, it would depend. It would depend. I remember one time I was trying a case against one of my best friends was the other attorney. Okay. You couldn't tell it during the trial except for we showed respect for each other. Mm-hmm. But I remember the jury panel coming out, and one of my neighbors was on the panel. Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to tell the other side and the judge, this is one of my neighbors.
Right.
And the other attorney told this joke. He actually asked that person in front of the crowd if they could promise they wouldn't hold any bias or prejudice against my client since they knew me and I was their lawyer. They got a big laugh, and that's the kind of jokes you tell.
Okay. Makes sense. But back to the books. Marilyn is a very, very interesting character. She is incredibly complex, not always easy to like. Can you talk a little bit about her? She must have been fun to write, maybe challenging to write.
Marilyn was obsessive to me. Mm-hmm. She is a combination of 2 characters that I came across in my life, and both obsessed me. And I could not understand the abilities and the powers they had over other people. And I always, from when I came across the first one in college, I always thought this is someone that has to be written about. This is something that is worth a book. And then I came across during my career someone else like that. And I put them both into this character. And this is who I would start books about over and over before I was 50, trying to get right. Mm-hmm. And I never would quite finish it. I'd do a few chapters, then get busy with another trial or my son's baseball or something like that, and move on. But Marilyn has a certain, she's not the most beautiful woman in the world. Mm-hmm. That's not what this is about. Mm-hmm. She's um, she's a touch overweight. She's not young. She's very experienced, and she's able most of the time to get men to do exactly what she wants most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
My experience with these type of people are, we're all sheep and they're wolves. They're a different species than the rest of us. We're the ones they consume. And that's who Marilyn is. She's a wolf in a world of sheep.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what she's used to. Now, what are wolves like? Well, wolves attack. Wolves are aggressive. Wolves don't always plan out everything. Things can go wrong with wolves if they're not successful immediately. That's how these wolves are, and kind of how Marilyn is.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always a few people that see, and this was true with the two that I came across. There's always a few people, I was not included, that see through this immediately or see through it faster than everyone else. And those people interested me too. And among those people I wanted to write about, and that is OC, this obsessive compulsive know-it-all detective that I loved writing, using as a comical relief in the books, by his mannerisms and his attitude, and what a know-it-all he is.
What's with the pants, Russell?
Oh, what is with those pants?
With those pants.
Those are what 1950s and 60s businessmen in Houston, Texas wore. So that's what their sons from very successful areas, a very few of them, wound up adapting to. And I always thought that was crazy. And the big black boots, no matter how hot it is, I never could understand. I practiced law for 40 years in Houston. I can tell you I wore boots to the courthouse maybe 3 times.
Yeah.
But there's a few people that can wear those big black boots and think that they're the coolest, most comfortable things they could wear. Yep. And that's part of who OC is, with those pants. You know, I'm so glad you asked that. I was obsessed with those pants. I think, you know how you can, as a writer, you can write something too many times. It becomes where it becomes a bore, right?
Okay.
I almost wrote it too many times because it made me laugh every time I wrote about it. So sometimes I would add little features to it too, because I have this incomplete vision of OC. Mm-hmm. Like his little mustache that doesn't move at the same rate or in the same way as his mouth moves. I just thought, I just think that's the craziest thing I ever saw.
Yeah. Yeah, he definitely is the character you can picture you're very descriptive in your images with OC. And I just realized you said he's obsessive compulsive and his initials are OC. I don't know if that's intentional, but I like it.
It was not intentional, but I can tell you what, writing about his compulsiveness, like I have one of the stories where I introduce him, he's doing a plan on taking apart a small mechanical piece, and he's working on a case as he's equivocating about the best wine to drink. I just love that. That's who he is. That's, know it all about everything, pretty good at everything.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about 3 characters. So when you sit down to write a story, and you have your basic outline or where you're going with that story and some of your characters, do you really have a good idea of those characters before you start writing, or do you like for them to evolve as you write, or is it a combination?
Okay. Number 1, I'm a planner. I'm not a pantser. Mm-hmm. Before I start, I outline the whole thing, right? Chapter by chapter to the end. Mm-hmm. But you and I both know that's not how it works. You can do that, and you can start writing, and it's a good way to let you know the direction you're going. But as these characters get more and more dimensional in your own soul, they start saying things you didn't expect them to say and doing things you didn't expect them to do and refusing to do things that are in the outline. So you got to re-outline everything from then on, right? And then you continue, and then they do it again. So it is a combination if you have a multi-dimensional character, because they take control of your story.
Yeah.
And God help me if they didn't.
Yeah. There's a character in the second book, and forgive me, the little girl character, and her name just flew right out of my head. I apologize.
Emmy.
She's one of those ones that surprised you because she seems like she's got some surprising characteristics to her. She's very intuitive for an 8-ish-year-old.
Yes, she is. And I did not intend her to have that.
Okay.
But when you writing in I must say, Murder by Storm, there were two of the most important things that I wanted to accomplish in the next book. Well, 3 was, number one, I wanted to tell the story of, I wanted to answer the questions of why Marilyn was the way she was. Mm-hmm. And to do that, I had to be able to write from a woman's perspective. And I got to tell you, I had to work hard to do that. I had to have editors help me to do that. And I Murder by Storm was a rewrite, not a write. I had to rewrite it to get it right. And part of it is with Emmy, I never planned on her being as important as she decided to be.
Okay.
She never was important in the outline. She became important by her, who she was. And once I wrote about the bullying that she had to deal with, it just kind of evolved from there, because I knew she would know what they were doing. And then the next step into the story, especially with her and her dog.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's really interesting that she wasn't supposed to be that big, because she does have an incredibly big and important role throughout both stories. That's you just never know what your characters are going to do and how much you're going to have to change, I would imagine.
That's right.
Yeah. So that is actually really fascinating to me, that Marilyn did not have as big of a role as she ended up having in both of these books, because I can't quite picture the way the stories were going to go without her with as big of a role as she played in the story. So you just, I guess, as an author, you never know what character is going to insist on, in this case, having her own way. Although in this case it actually makes sense, because that's kind of Marilyn's character. She was true to her character in the way she insisted on getting her own way. So it makes a little bit of sense. Time for our second break of this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking about some of the research that Russell did for the books. You are tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author Russell Little. Before the break, we were talking about the character of Marilyn, who in some ways was surprising in that she insisted on having a much bigger role in the books, and in other ways she was just absolutely, literally true to character in the way that she inserted herself into the storyline and got her own way. Let's go ahead and continue the conversation with Russell. Any particular research that you did for either of the books that you want to talk about?
Yeah, there is one funny thing I want to tell you about. So I practiced law for 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
When you practice law, you have a pool of private detectives that you work with
Sure.
because of the type of law that I practiced, which was courtroom law dealing with divorces and child custody cases.
Mm-hmm.
So you wind up having a lot of private detectives. So when I was writing first about Larry in Murder for Me, in the first book, I sat down for several hours with one of my private detectives about if someone wanted to, how do you follow someone? How do you tap someone in the modern technology? How do you detect if you're being tapped or if there's a GPS? Where do you install a GPS unit on a car? How do you make it work long term? What if it's just a short? There are all those little questions
Mm-hmm.
on number one that became embedded in both stories of stuff that private detectives would do and find out information for you. Sometimes you'd want to know, sometimes you wouldn't want to know how they found it out. And I wanted to know how all that worked because I wanted to include that as part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
So that was research. And then this wasn't research, but it was a big part. Murder by Storm is a murder thriller, psychological thriller that occurs during a hurricane.
Right.
Well, I've written out about 5 hurricanes, but Harvey was the big moment for me. I was living in a high-rise downtown. Harvey hit, took about 2 weeks to get there. It moved very slow before it got to Houston. Then it got to Houston, and then it just sat on top of Houston for 5 days.
Mm-hmm.
And so for those 5 days, I was walking in the hurricane across the park to where the refugee center was, where thousands of refugees were being brought by the Army and National Guard as their homes were wiped out. And so for 5 days, I helped these people. And then for weeks after, I helped gut homes of complete strangers that had no one to help them. They didn't know what to do. They couldn't start repairing their home because their home was flooded. So we would gut their homes and get it ready for repair and then move on to the next one. It changed my life. And all the heroic and unbelievable things that I saw during the hurricane, I wanted to record. So I actually put all of that in the book. And both the wonderful things about strangers that they don't know you, they don't know what you believe, they don't care what race you're in trouble, they're going to help you, and they're going to risk themselves to help you. That's something that happens. It's unbelievable and it's beautiful. I wanted to write about that. And it also occurred to me during the hurricane that the police are very busy doing other things.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that wipes out evidence and DNA like floodwater.
Right.
So I thought, what a great place to put my psychological thriller. So Murder by Storm happens as the hurricane's approaching Houston and then hits Houston.
Yep.
And then the hurricane leaves as it's resolved.
Yeah, the hurricane almost becomes like another character because it really does influence, as you said, it's approaching, it's there, and it departs. So it kind of in 3 acts.
I love that, the way you say that. It's almost Shakespearean. Thank you.
Almost, yeah. Yeah. So that would have been really interesting to both research, your own experience, but then some of the research as well, and then setting it up in those 3 parts to make the flow of the book. The second book,
Murder by Storm.
Yep, Murder by Storm could be resolved at the end, but there I see room. Are we going to see more from any characters?
Well, I have a 3rd book, Murder by Trial.
Okay.
that I'm not going to tell you about.
No, you can't. You don't have to. you don't have
There
to.
there is a the books, both Murder for Me and Murder by Storm, both have resolutions, but they both hint at more.
Yes. Okay. So.
And I'm not finished. I'm not finished with my antagonist. I'm not finished. I can't be finished with her. You know, when I first started writing this book, this is so weird. I shouldn't even tell you this, but I'm going to tell you this because it's funny. So I did not name her Marilyn when I was first writing. And you're a writer, aren't you?
Not professionally, not. I've never.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I must tell you, when I'm writing, I'm obsessed. There is nothing else. You sit down, you work a little bit, you look up, it's 7 hours later. Right. And I'm thinking about it all the time. It drives my wife crazy.
I'm sure.
So during the character developments and the struggles of developing a dimensional character, I actually had a dream where Marilyn, who looks just like I described her in my dream, said, was yelling at me that I got her name wrong, that wasn't her name. Her name was Marilyn. So I woke up the next morning, I was so excited. Melinda, my wife's name is Melinda. We've been married 41 years. I was like, Melinda, Marilyn came to me in my dream and told me that I got her name wrong. And she's like, who's Marilyn? Who's this woman you're dreaming of? I was like, it's my character. Her name's Marilyn. And she's like, you're creeping me out. Don't tell me stuff like that anymore. That's how obsessed I am with this.
Yeah. You know what? I tease my husband that when he says like really weird, funny things, I'll be like, you need therapy. I'm surprised your wife didn't say.
She's been telling me that for 40 years.
Yeah, it's what we do. So you are currently working on the third book, and that's fine. You know, not talking about it. But do you have an arc in mind? I mean, sorry, that's your wife. Marilyn seems to have a mind of her own. Are you just going to write as long as she's telling you to, or do you have an arc in mind?
No, I have. Now, this goes with saying what I told you before, which is the characters take control of fiction as you're writing it if they're strong characters. They say things that you don't plan them to say. They do things you don't plan them to do. And I've had characters refuse to do what I intended to do to them because they were too smart for me. So who knows what Marilyn's going to do? But I do have plans for Marilyn.
Okay. Well, I will be interested to see if those plans proceed the way that you are currently envisioning them, or if they can take a complete different route at some point in the writing.
I can say a little bit more. I've always wanted to, every one of my books has a different intellectual goal on my part of completion. Like the second book, writing from a woman's perspective. I found that an incredible challenge to both write it and to answer, because I got to tell you, after Murder for Me, everyone wanted to know, what is this thing that Marilyn can do, and how did she become what she is? So that's a big part of the next book, Murder by Storm, is to answer those two questions. Yeah. But in the next, I've always wanted to write a good trial book. And there's a certain thing about trial that, you know, as a lawyer, that I've tried cases for 40 years, is that the facts, there are three sets of facts. There are the facts that the audience knows, the public knows. There's the facts that the attorneys know, the hard facts. And then there are the facts that the jury finds out about and they know and make their decisions on. And that's a whole separate story. And I wanted to write about that because that's something that most lay people don't appreciate, just how different those three sets of facts are. So I wanted to write about that. And there's this little town in the panhandle of Amarillo, of Texas, named Amarillo, that I wanted to put a trial at. So that's what I'm doing. I'm writing about a trial in Amarillo, Texas.
Okay. Well, okay. Good to know. You were a lawyer, and then you started writing, and then you got the we'll just call it a nudge from your son to finish Murder for Me.
A very rude nudge.
Very rude. You can say it. He's your kid. But did you always want to write in terms of writing fiction, or did that come later in life? What kind of led you to that?
Okay, it's you can tell I have a story for everything.
Sure.
So when I was in the third grade, I had a couple of learning disabilities. By the end of the school, by the end of the summer, when school started, I had forgotten everything I'd learned. So I had to start over. So I'd always, back in the 60s and back in the 60s, they would actually put you in reading groups. So if you were a bad reader, you'd be in the third reading group, which, we think about now in education, the way that's labeling how terrible that is. Right. But that was a fact back then. So every year I'd start in the third reading group, and I would work hard. And by Christmas, I'd be in the second reading group. And by Easter, I'd be in the first reading group. And then by summer, I'd fall back. Well, the reading and the counselor told my mom at the end of the third grade year that I needed to start reading the newspaper every day during the summer. Okay. Because if I kept reading, I wouldn't fall back as fast. And so third grade, I'm starting to read the paper every morning with my mom and dad. They're having coffee. I'm having grape juice in the third grade, and I'm reading. And I wound up reading the editorial page every day. That's what I read. So I was from a very blue collar family. But I was reading about lawyers and politics and who was getting arrested for what, or some political issue. And that's what I read every morning. And those people were lawyers. And so that's what I wanted to be. Sure. So from third grade, I started wanting to be a lawyer because I had to read the editorial page every day before I went to school, because otherwise I'd be in the third reading group. And I was always like that. I wanted to write, though. Like in college, I was in Lubbock at college for a while, and there was a riot one night, and I'd never been in a riot. I had no idea what riots were like and the mentality of those in a riot. So I went and got in the riot so I could be a part of it. And then after it was over, I got away. Okay. And then I sat at my dorm for 2 hours. I remember it was like Friday night. So from Friday night, from about 1 o'clock in the morning till about 3, I spent writing it down so I could get the story and remember it. So when I could write about it. And so I was always like that. Okay. Except where I got lost after law school, you're working on your career. I'm trying to be a husband. I'm trying to be a good father. I had 3 kids. So I was busy so I would write a few chapters, never get done because something would come up, until I got rid of the last kid going to college. And he said, "You better do it before you're dead," which is what he said.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Well, I mean, the people we love aren't always the most tactful, but sometimes they give us the kick that we need to actually get working on what we've been putting off, and that seems to be the case here. So good for you, last kid before going to college. We're going to go ahead and take our final break of this episode. When we come back, advice from Russell for aspiring authors. You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my conversation with Russell Little. Before the break, he was telling the story of what set him on his path to writing for publication, and part of that was his son, who very bluntly told him to get to it. So let's go ahead and finish up this conversation. What advice would you give to someone who wants to write, who is trying to write?
Okay. There's three pieces. Number one, you need to read. That's clichéic. I hate that. But you don't need to just read anything. You need to read the great literature, not the crud. You need to read Proust. You need to read Dostoevsky. You need to read Snow Country. It was a Nobel Prize winning Japanese novel from 1921. That's the type of stuff you got to read. Dunces of the Confederacy. Have you ever read that? It won a Pulitzer Prize.
I don't think I have. I know the book, but I don't think I've actually read it.
You need to read it. It's a great book for the first 2/3. It has a character in it that is so memorable, you can't ever forget it. That's one of the things I want to do in my next book. And I've kind of had a breakthrough, so I'm very excited about it, is a character so memorable, you can't ever forget them. And that's the kind of stuff you need to read. And number two is you need to start writing now because it's really hard. It's a skill. It's not a gift. You have to write a lot before you're good, and you're going to write a lot of junk before you write anything well. It reminds me of Hemingway and Fitzgerald being such good friends. And Hemingway could just spit stuff out but it wasn't because he was born that way. It was because he wrote for newspapers and columns for 25 years before he tried that first book while he was in Paris. And Fitzgerald, Hemingway actually wrote in one of his books, Movable Feast, in the chapter about Fitzgerald, how Fitzgerald would sit for hours struggling about one word. It's hard. It's hard work. Start now. Write a lot. Don't trust your family and friends because they're going to lie to you and tell you it's good.
Yep.
Get in a writing group. Share it with them. Make sure you're in a writing group with people that have negative opinions so they can beat you up a little bit. I got to tell you, there were people I wouldn't talk to for 6 months. I was so mad at them in writing groups. But that's a baptism that's necessary. So I would say read great literature, start writing today, get in a group with people that will tell you the truth.
Makes sense. All right. 3 pieces. So I like it. Good. It's a good number. When you take the time to read just for you, maybe not for research or anything like that, what are your go-to genres and some of your go-to authors?
Okay. I read Dostoevsky every year. I read Brothers of Karamazov or Crime and Punishment every year because I like it's kind of the murder thrillers of great literature. And I love Russian writers. And also he's both writing about the subject the subject he's writing about, but he's also writing about a great debate between him and Nietzsche and who was right. And so this many layered of the book. So you can read it every year and you're not reading something new. You're squeezing something out of it again. I read Proust, and I also, about every third book, I read a good shoot 'em up science fiction novel because I need my brain to rest, right? So when I'm ready for a rest, I go to shoot 'em up like the Expanse. I don't know if you've read that. It's a modern New York Times science fiction series. that was my last escape, is reading that series.
Okay. I just like to listen. I just like to think of you reading Dostoevsky with your accent. I love your Russian Dostoevsky with you. I think that's awesome.
And you think what? I can tell you what's worse.
What's that?
What was worse? People say, "Well, are you going to read your own Audible book?" No, people couldn't listen to this voice and this twang for a whole book. It would be awful. So you make me hold my head.
Will there be audiobooks?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
there has to be. My books are perfect for audiobook.
So, all right, good to know that they are coming. I love audiobooks, so I love when there are audiobook versions. If you want to know more about you and the books, talk about website and any social media that you're active on so they can find you.
Okay. RussellLittleAuthor.com is where they can find my webpage. If they want to know, like today, Russell Stories is the Facebook author page, Russell Stories.
Okay.
And like today, I posted that we were going to do this interview at 1. I let people know what my who I'm interviewing with, when it's coming out, how great I think the podcaster was. So I'll be talking about how great you are on there because I'm having a blast. I could not realize that we'd already spent all our time. And so if you just want to know what I'm doing, Russell Stories on Facebook.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Russell, we've talked about the books and we've talked about a few things, but is there anything that we have not covered that you wanted to make sure that we highlighted?
I think you've done everything. You do a great job.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you taking the time out of your day. We had a little scheduling hiccup, so thank you for your willingness to be flexible and thank you for scheduling time with me. I really appreciate it.
I had a blast.
So thank you once again to Russell for joining me for this interview. If you are a fan of legal thrillers, of psychological thrillers, of characters that do maybe the unexpected, or you like characters that just you don't know it, but they make the author do things that the author didn't expect to do. There are 2 books available now and a 3rd one coming. So it's always nice when you find an author that you're interested in, and there are not 1 but 2 books at this point, and more coming. Like I said, the 2nd one will be out soon. 1st one is currently available. So if this is a series that you are interested in, you should definitely check it out. Hopefully you enjoyed this conversation with Russell. Had a very fun time talking to him about books and writing. He has a story for everything, which is a lot of fun, and just enjoyed getting to meet him and talk to him. So hopefully you did as well. And if you are interested in either of these books, you know where you can find them. Go to your local bookstore, go to whatever bookstore you frequent the most, go to your library. All good choices. I hope that you will, of course, join me for my next episode. We're switching gears to middle grade graphic novel next time. I will be speaking with Morgan Middleton about the first book in her series, and this one's called Asteria, The Legend of the Fallen Star. As I said, it is middle grade. It is about a young woman who really unexpectedly finds herself at a school where she has powers, and I'm really looking forward to talking to Morgan, and hopefully she'll give me some insight as to what is coming next, because I want to know. But looking forward to this conversation, and I hope that you will join me for next week's author interview for that episode. In the meantime, as always, if you are a fan of this podcast and you have not done so already, please do like, follow, subscribe so that you always know when there are new episodes coming out. It also helps the algorithm a lot. Something else that helps the algorithm is to leave a positive review. Really does help get this podcast out to more readers such as yourselves, and is greatly, greatly appreciated. If you are on social media and want to follow the podcast on social media, you can find us on Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok. Love hearing from you, so come find me and the podcast on social media, and again, answer all of my nosy questions. What are you reading? What are you going to read next? Have you read any of the authors that I have spoken to? Which books of theirs do you really particularly enjoy? Or what authors have you found maybe because of this podcast? I want to know all of the answers. So come and find the podcast on social media and just satisfy my curiosity. I hope you're having a great week. I hope whatever you're doing this week that you find plenty of time to read. As I always say, I hope that the week gives you plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to